remembering no matter where you're at in your journey, there's some sort of insight that you can pick up from each of these presentations. And so with that, I want to turn this over to Brittany, Sarah, and Carol from the San Diego Teacher Residency to talk with us about what they do when it comes to resident recruitment and selection.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. J. And thanks to Jenna and Dr. J for inviting us. I hopped on a call with them like a week and a half ago, and they're like, we just want to pick your brain. And then at the end of the call, they told us, they're like, could you present to everyone? And we balked a little bit because we're a very homegrown, very boutique little program, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we're delighted to be here with you all. And I know Carol and I have been chatting already about all the ideas we're getting from everyone else here. So thanks for having us. We're going to tag team a little, so maybe we can each introduce ourselves briefly and then we'll launch in. So I've had the great privilege and pleasure of spending the last 6 years building and designing and refining our program, which we'll talk about. And we are hosted at the High Tech High Graduate School of Education, which is all of our professional home. Carol, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. I'm Carol Battle, and I am the multiple subject program manager with the teacher residency. Been there almost 2 years, and I taught both elementary and middle school. So my primary focus is the multiple subject folks. However, because we are small and mighty, as Sarah said, we all do all the things. So it's been really amazing to be part of the program. Britt?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I know everyone's all over. I'm Brittany Quinones, and I work with this amazing team in admissions, what we're going to talk about a little bit today, and really that outreach piece. So I loved hearing what Holly was sharing as well, and I think we have some similarities, so we will share more in a moment.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off, and we're going to focus more on our admissions and selection process than on our recruitment process, but Brittany is our incredible powerhouse, all things recruitment related. And as Carol said, we kind of all chip in on that front. So if you're curious to hear a deeper dive on the recruitment side of things, we can maybe answer some questions in the Q&A. But we're going to focus more on our resident selection process right now. And like I said, this is really a process that we dreamed up and have refined over the years in conversations with our partners and also just through trial and error. And we feel pretty increasingly confident it really is helping us yield really high quality groups of residents that are like ready to go and really are kind of already on board with our very particular vision of teaching and learning that we're trying to foster in this program. So just to back up, I think we may be a little bit distinctive in this space in that our residency is our sort of like main host is actually an IHE, but it's a non-traditional IHE. So the High Tech High Graduate School of Education is about 15 years old. We're a fully accredited, not-for-profit private IHE, and we emerged out of the K-12 context. So unlike a big R1, we have a faculty of about 45 total. We run several master's programs, and the credential master's program that we run, as well as we run a number of improvement networks statewide, and we have a Center for Research on Equity and Innovation. And what's different about us in a lot of ways is that our institution of higher ed grew out of High Tech High network of charter schools, which is a network of 16 K-12 public charter schools around San Diego County. Some of you all may know our schools. We are obviously we're open enrollment charter schools, but we have a very distinctive mission of using project-based learning as a vehicle to achieve educational equity, to focus on liberation and deeper learning in our classrooms, and to really disrupt some of what we see as the more oppressive practices that persist in public schools. And so High Tech High Graduate School shares a lot of those values. A lot of our faculty have a history of working, teaching, leading in High Tech High schools. So although we are a real IHE we still have this very distinctive relationship. And so as it happens, we built our residency program in collaboration with High Tech High's K-12 schools. So our original and still our main LEA partner are those 16 schools, and our residency program, although it's hosted by our graduate school, we have very, very deep, rich relationships with the school directors, instructional leaders, and teachers in those 16 schools. And over the last couple of years, we have very gradually started to add on some other partner schools that are not high-tech high, but that are aligned to our mission, which is to help teachers learn to teach for justice and deeper learning via projects. So we have a pretty specific vision. Thanks for changing the slide. And as a result, we're really seeking a specific type of candidate. And so our whole admissions process is focused on trying to identify folks who are going to really connect with our vision of teaching and learning, with the values that anchor not just our graduate school program and our residency, but also with all of our partner schools and all the folks involved in our program. So just to back up, we're a 2-year program. The first year is our residency year, where our folks are embedded 4 full days a week as pre-service residents in one of our partner school sites. And they are working toward their preliminary multiple subject or single subject credential. We don't yet have an ed specialist program, although we'd like to add one on. And we have them at our graduate school 1 full day a week for coursework, as well as 1 night. And toward the end of the year, we're actually, because of the CTC grant, we're working toward formalizing our partnership with some of our clinical sites. But we give our residents job application support. They are sort of prioritized in the hiring processes with our various partners, but we don't yet have like a formal you receive a job guarantee if you are if you make it through our residency. But we have a fairly informal version of that results in very similar things, which is to say many of our residents end up working in the networks and in the schools that they do their residency at. And then in their second year, they're working as teachers of record, and they complete their master's degree with us as well. So we're going to double click now. Oh, very briefly. So how big are we? We are much smaller than I think a lot of your programs are. At present, we have a cohort of 32 teacher residents, which is as big as we have ever had. We also have about 30 second years. So we have 60 students in all across the 2 years of our program. And at the moment, as you can see, we have a very large group of multiple subject candidates, and we've really struggled with STEM recruitment, which is something we're really focused on trying to do, because obviously it's not just us that is struggling, it's also the schools we work with are struggling to find really high quality, well-trained STEM teachers. So we have some English, some social science, and then a handful of math and science. And I should just add, we are very focused, as I think all of you are, on teacher diversity along a variety of lines, but especially racial diversity. So at the moment, we're at about just over 60% of our current residents identify as BIPOC. Okay, so last piece from me, and then I'm going to let Brittany and Carol dive into the specifics of our admissions process. But I wanted to just name, we have a pretty intensive admissions process. It sounds a little bit similar to what Holly described. We have like 3 fairly intensive checkpoints and processes that prospective candidates go through. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort and labor, and we think it is 500% worth it. I think you all probably would, I'm preaching to the choir here, but especially because our program is small and because Carol and Brittany and I and some of our other colleagues in the program end up working very, very closely with the residents that we are involved in selecting. We have seen how important it is to get the right people in the door. We've seen how hard it is to find those people and raise their awareness about the program in the first place. But then when it comes to actually selecting a cohort, if we make the wrong choices, or if we pick people who actually aren't particularly aligned, don't already have some of the dispositions and curiosities that our program seeks to nurture, we are the ones who live with the consequences. Like Carol and I literally end up spending hours of our life the following year supporting candidates who are struggling for one way or another, or trying to get them on the bus and they're not able to get on the bus. And then it's a lot of time, time and tears, counseling them out and so forth. And we really don't want that. It's not worth anybody's time to do that. So our process is really high touch. We have a lot of different people involved in it at various points, as you'll hear. We are all involved at every phase, and it feels like time well spent times 200. So I guess if you're building a residency, my advice is like, this is really a high leverage spot to spend your energy and your time getting the right people in the door, because it makes everything else, it sort of opens up the pathway for everything else to work the way that you hope it will. And with that, Britt, you want to describe the specifics of our process?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll get into the admissions piece here. And kind of before we go through all of these details, I want to set a bit of context as well. I know Sarah shared our currently enrolled number, but we generally see about 60, 70 applications each cycle. And obviously we've been growing each year in the recent years. And out of those almost 70 applicants that we see, we actually get a great batch of that application in the beginning of our process, really by the priority deadline. So something that we've done over the years is kind of push candidates to apply by these two deadlines that we've set, one in February and the second one in April. And there's a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of marketing that's put into pushing candidates to apply for both of those, really instead of doing rolling admission. So just to kind of set the context for that, those are the two big pushes. And we have seen about 50% of those 70 applicants, or 50 of those 70 applicants are coming to us early in that first priority deadline. So we take most of our candidates in that first round, which is helpful for a number of reasons. But as we get through the process, our first step, they have initial materials include a statement of purpose. It's a max of 2 pages, so it's rather simple. Resume, just like they would send to any traditional job that they would apply to. Letter of recommendation, which is confidential, one is required. And then we ask them to send their official transcripts from their undergraduate institution. And all of that information is essentially housed through a simple form, but we do use Airtable as our tool to kind of set up the application form and basically provide candidates an option to submit information through Airtable. So that's the tool that you can see in the blue here. We're using a few different tools throughout the process. Once they submit those materials to us, Carol, Sarah, go through the process of reviewing those applicants and kind of seeing if they fit our initial qualifications for what we're looking for in terms of really being the right fit for the program. So after they assess that they do, and 95% of them are invited to step 2 to complete the virtual one-way interview. In the virtual one-way interview, we're going to share in a few moments what that looks like, but we do use SparkHire as another tool where they can record the interview on their own time, and then we review that on our time as well. And that was done kind of instead of doing, let's say, 70 individual interviews, we found this resource to really offer that option in the middle of COVID. This is going to be our 3rd year using SparkHire. So it was a really easy way for folks to schedule that on their own and for us to review it on our own time as well, instead of scheduling 70 individual interviews. And then the last part is the Bonanza, which Carol is going to go through a little bit more in a moment. But that's kind of the big level overview. Next slide. When you go back to the slides, I think it'll be really helpful to look through the timeline. As I mentioned, there are a lot of pushes really at this point in the year and doing outreach and thinking about getting as many folks interested to really launch our application, which we do on December 1st. And then they are due by February. So again, they complete the initial ones, they're invited to the SparkHire interview and then invited to the Bonanza. But all of that happens essentially from February to March when we send decisions, and then we restart the whole process and then do that for the second batch of applications. And I think the best part about it is that, as I mentioned earlier, we also have the folks from the priority deadline committed to us by March. And it's a bulk of them, as I mentioned. So that's been pretty effective in our process so far. I'll go to the next slide because I know we're going to run through it and folks will have questions. But one of the things that we've been really excited about in the one-way interviews is really the ability to, as I mentioned, not only review it on our own time, it's very flexible for candidates to be able to complete this process, but we're also able to ask the questions, as Sarah mentioned, which really indicate whether this candidate is going to be a right fit for us. So we rewrote these. We started with an initial set of questions the first year, rewrote them the next year, but they actually have 3 minutes to respond to that question through SparkHire, which is the platform that we use. And it has given, I think Carol and Sarah can speak to this a little bit more at the end, but such a helpful tool in helping us hear what candidates are sharing really in their statement of purpose and how they will fit and work with our program throughout the time here. So at each step, we're collecting these different pieces for them. And this has been a big one, not only for us, but also for directors in terms of placement later. Incredibly helpful to just share the information with directors as we're considering the placement process as well. Directors, principals. Yes. Thank you, Sarah. And that's a little bit about the kind of admission process from a 10,000-foot view. But I think, Carol, the next step is the Bonanza process. So let's share a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, Brittany. One thing that I don't know that was mentioned was that, next slide though, also, well, there you go. We have a big rubric that we're using to, we call it our note catcher really. And so for each stage with the application, looking at letters of rec, looking at their Spark Hire videos, and then this Bonanza process that I'm about to talk about, we capture certain things or questions for each other so that we know kind of, did you note that they said this or they didn't say this? And it really helps us keep track of what we're thinking about a potential resident and what they do know and what it seems like they might not know just yet. So the Bonanza is actually our performance task kind of portion of the application process, and it's got two parts. So the first part is they're supposed to do a 10-minute lesson and where they teach something to a few peers. There's a teacher residency faculty there, and we try to bring in some of the directors or potential principals that they might be working for. And we just watch them teach their lesson, and we pretend that we're students. And this is full well expecting, well, you haven't had teacher training. We know it doesn't have to be perfect, but just to see their presence, their ideas, if they have taught before, what kind of things that they're bringing into the lesson. And then we have a debrief with them after, one-on-one with someone from SDTR and that person. And so we get a chance to see even a mini coaching session, like how are they, how do they respond when we ask them to be reflective, how reflective are they? So we can learn quite a bit about them by both the lesson, the way they interact with their peers as they're teaching, and then with the coaching part. And then the second thing that we do is give them a little bit of homework before the Bonanza. And the last several years, we've had them listen to an episode from a podcast called Seeing White. And this particular one has to do with Indigenous nations and a particular battle that went on. And chances are they probably haven't heard of it. And so it gives them a chance to deal and kind of grapple and soul search a little bit about some of the anti-racist pedagogy that we're going to be talking about, and sense their own readiness or what vocabulary they do or don't have to talk about things. And we joke that we're lurking, but we turn off our cameras and we kind of pop around and listen to the conversations that are going on. And you can see the prompt here too. They really go into this idea and talk about how they react to it and talk about how it might be reflected in our K-12 schools now and how they might adjust their teaching based on information from here. So it really gives us quite a bit of information to about the resident. And so here's the little quick agenda of what that half day looks like. So it is a half day. Due to COVID, we popped it on Zoom, but we actually think it's more equitable to do it on Zoom because we've had people participate literally from all over the world. They can join in. And so I mentioned here that the types of people are in the room. We share why they're there. And so it's all eyes and all hands on as we take a look at people, and we have them gather their information and add it to that big note catcher / rubric that we were talking about before we make our final decisions. So that is Bonanza. And
I'll just add one more thing, because I know it's time for Q&A, but I just wanted to layer in that Bonanza piece is, we only invite the folks to Bonanza that we're pretty sure we want in the program. Like we've already gone through 2 layers of screening. So we also treat that as an opportunity for them to get to know us. It's really, we don't say that to them, but it's not just about us screening them. They get to meet our faculty. They get to feel our vibe, our ethos. We're exposing them to the types of courageous conversations that we want them to be having throughout the program. And we name that for them, that what they do in that Bonanza, that half day, is a sort of echo of the type of work that they'll be doing in our program. And we see it as a little bit of a seal the deal situation with them, as well as us, gathering a final phase of information about them and whether they're the right fit. And there's always some folks we're on the fence about, and Bonanza gives us that last set of information we need. But in a lot of cases, we're so excited about the folks we invite. We really hope that they choose us, and the Bonanza is an opportunity for them to get a feel for what the program might be like.
Sarah, I have a follow-up. Actually, I have 2 follow-up questions that I think while we wait for those who want to post their questions in the chat. You mentioned that directors, which are principals, are part of the interview process. Can you talk a little bit about why that was a decision that you made?
Yeah, I mean, our school principals are, they also end up, like, for better or worse, living with the choices that we make of the residents. And so number one, we really value their feedback and their thinking. Number two, it helps them feel like they have ownership of this process and excited to welcome residents into their space. And I think also sometimes we'll have school principals who, after the Bonanza, are like, oh my gosh, those folks I met in my room, I will host any of them. They are amazing. I think they'd be a great fit. So it also helps to kind of generate some energy and enthusiasm, rather than being like, here's who we gave you. There's some interest. And I'd also circle back to the Spark Hire interviews. We send those interviews. One of the various reasons having a one-way interview is great is we send those videos to school principals, and also then to potential cooperating teachers down the line. Once folks have joined the program and committed to us, those videos are a really powerful tool to get people excited about hosting particular residents later. So, in June, when we're making placements, we will send those Spark Hire videos to the folks who are going to potentially host those candidates. And it's much more powerful to see somebody on video than it is to read what they wrote for their personal statement or look at their resume.
That's so great. It's almost like they get to see the candidates before they even hire them, to see if they're interested, and then watch them grow throughout the year. That's incredible. My other question is, we have some people here who may be doing this work alone. It's only 0.5 of their contract. How do you because you have 3 team members here, how did you expand your team so that you weren't doing all of this work alone?
Slowly, at great pain and cost. I mean, you're seeing our team right here. We have like 2 other folks who I would name as, predominantly focused on our program, but and we have amazing faculty members and partners, obviously, but we are a very small team, and I appreciate those of you who are an even smaller team at this point. I was SDTR when we started. It was just me. It was entirely overwhelming to have to do it all on my own. I leaned real hard on some folks who were colleagues and friends until we could, scrape together the budget to hire Carol, and then, we've gone from there. But we're still a very small, scrappy little team, and we rely a lot on the generosity of folks who are in some way touch the program. We'll ask our alums to join us for stuff, and we'll send them a Starbucks gift card, but we're not paying for folks to do that. So I guess lean on your relational networks until you're able and ready to hire folks on would be my not very useful advice on that front.
No, I think that's great. Internal and external partnerships are important, especially when you're trying to move these 2 institutions to move together in one direction. So thank you for sharing that. We do have a couple questions in the chat. One is from Arlette. We currently do phone screens, and I've considered switching to a process similar to yours using Spark Hire. Can you share more about the pros, cons that you considered when choosing to set up your process this way? Have you received any feedback from candidates about this process? What has that been?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question, because Spark Hire was initially something that our HR department was actually using, and they were using it successfully to hire folks. And we were kind of able to work with that department to collaborate on not only the cost, but also the setup process. So to answer your question, Arlette, I'm kind of like the Spark Hire administrator, And so I set up that entire process in there, and there are limitations to it. I think one of the biggest pieces is like, yeah, having a person who can dedicate the time to do that. After you set it up initially, it's actually quite easy in terms of sending an email when the interview is complete. And then what we do on the back end is I kind of work to attach that to the application. So it's all like one application when Carol and Sarah go ahead and are ready to read it. So there's a bit of a back end setup process. But the one thing that I've heard is that, I mean, candidates do feel like it is a little bit anxious, a little bit of anxiety for them to kind of record themselves, but there is the ability for them to go back and re-record. There's a timer, but they have the ability to go back, and we set that up on the back end so that we are also providing the questions in advance, which has made a huge difference. The first year, we didn't know what we were doing. We just launched it, and I was like, okay, just go, submit your application. As I was hearing back and as I tried it myself, I found that it was really helpful to actually have the questions in advance, give them time to prepare, give them at least 5 days to do the recording. But I would say, Arlette, that it is better than a phone screen because it's literally a platform that does all of the work for you in terms of uploading, putting it together. So it's definitely nice to have a platform for that.
And just to layer in, I was very skeptical of this. I was like, no, nothing can replace face-to-face. Like, I want to sit down or at very least be on Zoom with somebody, like interacting with them. And as we've grown, number one, I think Brittany, you said earlier, it was just unsustainable. But number two, some of the advantages I didn't even realize would be there, have like popped up to us and really like sold us on it. So for example, we might have a candidate that we're pretty certain we like, but we're not like, we don't feel from the Bonanza or anything else that we're quite sure of their sort of commitments and thinking around educational equity. Are they strong enough to start our program? And I'll be like, hey, let me look back at how they answered that Spark Hire question. Let me rewatch it. And so like with a live interview, that you don't have that same ability to kind of hold it all there, go back, rewind, watch again. And while we don't want to place all the emphasis on something they said at a given moment, it also is really useful to be able to kind of go back when we're on the fence about somebody.
I can imagine that one of the things that excites me about this particular process is that sometimes how people present themselves in writing and on paper, maybe it's not the most polished, or it's not the best look, right? Especially if you're a first generation college student or something, having to kind of go through that process, it like gives another opportunity for people to see the potential. And so, and I think with that Spark Hire, I don't know if you mentioned that it's not like you take it right there and you're done. Like, I think they have a little bit of time to complete it. And so I feel like it gives people opportunities to show who they are and show themselves, who might have otherwise been screened out because, and I think when we're thinking about candidates of color, first generation, to access or opportunities like this, it's another touch point that I think would be, from an equity perspective, really welcome.
Yeah, and Dr. J, that's why we screen out very few folks from their first application, only if it looks like they're unlikely to be meeting our the prereqs, like they don't yet have a degree and they're not on track to, get it right away. Or if it's really clear that it's a form letter and they didn't do any research into our particular program, that might be another reason we disqualify someone. But like Britt said, 95% of folks who go through stage one get invited for the interview, and then we get pickier after that because we really want to give them that chance to share who they are on video.
We have 2 more questions in the chat. So this one's for Carol. All activities matter, but what is the most revealing aspect of the Bonanza for identifying dispositions fit for the program?
Yes, thank you. And so I had to think hard about this because I wanted to say all of them, but I understand that's not the question. So if I had to choose, I think it would be the teaching the lesson and the coaching that comes afterwards, because part of teaching, and especially part of teaching at like a PBL type school, is everything's new. You got to think on your feet. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try. we need that kind of attitude. And so coming in like, okay, I've never taught a thing before, but I'm going to teach everyone how to tie their shoes or whatever it is. And their attitude within that tells us quite a bit. And I think even more, we learn so much about the coaching session afterwards, because when we ask, how do you think that went? Or if you could do it again, what might you change? It shows us what their thinking is in way more of an in-depth way than any other part of the process. So I know that I got so excited with my multiple subject folks and talking about their lessons. Well, where'd you get that idea? And I learned all kinds of things about students and, their love of this or their hobby of this or their dream of this, like just from that little 10-minute, it was not even 10 minutes, maybe 7-minute coaching session with them following. So I would say that those are super, super telling and things that we can't learn from them in any other way.
Thank you, Carol. Another question from Heather here, Michelle, is you mentioned that you were able to process 70 applicants. What are some of your recruitment efforts, given that you have such a focus on demographics that you are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do lots of different things. We've been trying lots of different things, especially throughout the last 2 years since I've been here. I come from an undergraduate admission background. So a lot of my kind of knowledge base and like doing recruitment is actually with like that as a template. However, it's incredibly different, right? Because we're finding students who are just graduating with their bachelor's degrees or in the community in other spaces where they are either working with students already or working in similar jobs where they might be interested in teaching in the future. So, I mean, I think we're lucky in a sense to have our 16 schools that we start the recruitment there and developing those connections with directors/principals and identifying the folks who are already in our network, who are maybe working as academic coaches, paraprofessionals. And so a lot of it is word of mouth and direct referrals from our directors. But as we're expanding more in the community, we're really trying to find like all of the different ways to get connected and do recruitment in that way. And I think this season so far, I've been focusing on one being back in person, which is hugely important, I think, but going to college, career, and graduate school fairs. Where they're having them live here in San Diego. So because folks have to be with us, obviously full time, we're really trying to focus on the local piece 100%.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.